The bad news is sometimes roughly between your 40s and your 60s, the lenses in your eyeballs, they're gonna stiffen, making you farsighted. It's a condition known as presbyopia, and everyone eventually gets it. You, me, someone you like, someone you hate. Time is the great equalizer. And presbyopia accounts for the vast majority of preventable or untreated vision impairments worldwide, according to the World Health Organization. But the good news is that you can easily fix it with a pair of over-the-counter reading glasses. But only if you have access to said counter and money to buy them in the first place. And sadly, nearly 1 billion people in the developing world can't take that for granted, which is why over 90% of people with untreated presbyopia live in lower middle-income countries. And within sub-Saharan Africa, more than 8 in 10 people with the condition go untreated. To which I know some people might say, so what, Phil? Yeah, it sucks. But like blurry vision's gotta be at the bottom of the list of problems for these parts of the world, especially compared to infectious diseases like tuberculosis, malaria, and AIDS that are still out of control. But to that, I would say 1, just because other problems exist doesn't mean this one's less important, especially because 2, yeah, it turns out fucked up eyeballs kill people too. Right? People with poor central visual acuity are almost 50% more likely to have a road accident crash, according to The Lancet. And in poor countries where untreated impairments are more common and drivers often obtain a license without undergoing a vision test, those traffic deaths make up more than 90% of the world's total. And that's even though those countries account for only 60% of cars. Right? So we can make a strong guess that simple vision problems may indirectly kill tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people each year. But also, while fatalities are important, the issue is so much bigger than that. Right? For example, young children can have a harder time getting an education, which affects them for the rest of their lives. With the global director of Our Children's Vision, a nonprofit that supplies eyeglasses in Africa, telling the New York Times, many of these kids are classified as poor learners or just dumb and therefore don't progress at school. But then even for people listed as uneducated farmers, the disability takes a toll. With, for example, the outlet talking to an Indian sharecropper who couldn't spot pests on his wheat crops and accidentally sprayed the wrong insecticide because he misread the label, as well as other examples like coffee farmers in Bolivia who couldn't tell which beans were ripe. And, it's not just inconvenient, it's detrimental. Right? According to the World Health Organization, the world loses a projected $400 billion in potential productivity every year because of vision impairment. And that despite there being a surprisingly easy fix. With The Lancet reporting that simply giving Indian tea pickers reading glasses made them 22% more productive. And for those over the age of 50, that number jumped to nearly 32%, which brings us to the most recent study that shows how these gains translate into cold, hard cash. Because if we can't appeal to people's hearts, why not their wallets? Because we saw researchers picking out a group of over 800 far-sighted tea pickers, weavers, seamstresses, and others between the ages of 35 and 65 in Bangladesh. They then gave half of them free reading glasses. What a shitty time to be a part of the control group. But when they followed up, 8 months later, the ones with glasses were making 33% more money than the ones without. And some people who were previously unemployed, they found work. And all of this, even though barely more than a third of them were literate. Because even if you can't read, reading glasses also make it easier to thread needles and stitch clothing, for example. Which is also why one tailor even called the glasses his lifeline and said that they caused his income to double. With other research also noting how presbyopia makes basic things like cooking, using a phone, or recognizing money more difficult. And in many villages, the benefits can be social as well as economic for women in particular. With the Bangladesh country director for Vision Spring, a nonprofit that took part in the study, explaining to the Times, when it takes longer to sew and clean, or you can't pick out all the stones from the rice, in some households it results in domestic violence. So of course, there specifically, eyeglasses are more of a band-aid fix than actually addressing the deeper problem. But social and economic impacts aside, improving people's eyesight also improves their quality of life. With, for example, the Times describing how a 12-year-old boy in India had to give up flying kites, then cricket, and then his dreams of becoming a pilot. And adding that his constant squinting gave him headaches and he dreaded walking home for fear of being hit by traffic. And all of that as the World Health Organization notes that adults with vision impairment can suffer higher rates of depression and anxiety. And for older adults, they're more likely to experience social isolation as well as falls and fractures. Which also, just to be clear, this is not to say that people with low vision or no vision, they can't live life to the fullest. Right? And I also want to preface, the following words are not from me, they are from Chris on my team. Take it from the blind guy that's working on this story with me. They certainly can. Chris is out here trying to get me canceled. But, he said we can still work within the limits of what different people's bodies can do to maximize their functionality. And in that respect, the right pair of glasses can be as life-changing for a low vision person as a good cane, screen reader, or other assistive tech are for a totally blind person. And notably, compared to the typical public health problems policymakers usually focus on in poor countries, addressing presbyopia is exceptionally cheap and easy. It actually takes very little training to get community workers to do fittings for new eyeglass customers, and a single pair can cost only a couple of dollars to produce, sometimes even as low as 50 cents depending on the factory. And so the World Health Organization estimates it would only cost around $25 billion to fill the gap of unmet vision impairment needs globally, which again, to appeal to people's wallets, that's pennies on the dollar compared to the $400 billion in productivity losses I mentioned earlier, which remember, that is per year. But because of a lack lack of resources and a general unawareness about the issue, governments and philanthropists devote almost no money to it. Plus, poor countries tend to regulate the market much more strictly than we do in the US and Europe. So whereas you and I in the developed world can just go pick up a pair of reading glasses at the drugstore, people elsewhere have to first get a prescription from a vision specialist who may not even be available in certain regions. And as many populations around the world grow older and older, the need for basic eye care services and products will only increase. And so with all that said, I'm going to put links of one of the orgs I mentioned, Vision Spring, down below in case you feel compelled to donate. But also with everyone, I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Because in retrospect, it's so obvious that this would be such a widespread problem, but it was very eye-opening to learn about.